Thank you, Joni. Very gracious words. So what I'm going to do is just stand back and reflect, because as Joni pointed out, awakening the power of language, evolutionary dilation and shift in the power of language, liberating language or literacy. Those words may not mean too much, but literacy is like almost a code word for the consciousness, the script we're using in our mind that shapes our life. That's our literacy. And if our literacy is stunted and it's not developing, or if it's dogmatic, or it's rigid, or it's become fixated or ossified, and not growing, evolving, which is exactly what all of our great wisdom, spiritual teachers across the planet have been urging. And it's easy to miss it. And so the heart of my reflection, preparing this space for dialogue and to hear from Rupert on his amazing work, Science Set Free, I want to talk about how do we form ideology? What is ideology? How does our mind get closed and fixated, and therefore our culture? Because the way we use our minds shapes our lives and our culture and our world. And most of us are not educated to be sensitized to the fact that the lens of the mind that has been inculcated and cultivated in utero and beyond, it's in our culture in every way, and we just grow up with it, and we see the world, and we have our experience and our lives, and it works or doesn't work in certain ways, but we are not aware that your own lens of the mind could be different, it could be shaped differently. And if you were raised in a different cultural setting, a different religious world, a different perspective, that's what a culture is. A culture is a meme, a grammar, a form of literacy that shapes the mind. And when you have your lens, everything you see, everything you feel internally, all your relations, your whole world is shaped by the lens. And if we don't have an awareness of that, then we have the feeling that this is a fait accompli, reality is given. But when you begin to encounter different worlds, really encounter them, not through monologue, through your lens, but realize the other culture, the other religion, the other world is speaking a different grammar, a different structure, a different conceptual space. It makes sense differently. If you're in the Judeo-Christian world space, let's say, not to overgeneralize, but I already did, and you are trying to enter the Hindu mind and do some yoga, are you really doing yoga? Or ego yoga? Mono yoga from your lens? Did you go into karma, dharma, samsara? Do you understand prana? Have you read the Bhagavad Gita and understood the voice of Krishna speaking the Om script? Have you entered the Buddha's mind? Could we enter into Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching and understand the Qi energy from where we are? African ways of thought, indigenous ways, so many different worlds in the spectrum of culture. And yet, if we stand back from whatever lens we have, this is the main point, and open up just for a moment, if you could dilate space to go into a global space, which means a more dilated, open space of heart and mind where you could step back from your lens a little bit, not to privilege it, not to just assume that this is the only way to see, because that's where dogmatism begins to arise, and begin to open the space to listen to other worlds. That's a global space. It dilates and opens for, you will begin to hear astounding disclosures that you couldn't see before as readily from the mindset or the lens that you were living. It impedes you to see deep patterns. Because when you begin to step back into the global space, and I'll go up on the stage in a moment to begin to put a visualization, and I'm going to move very quickly, because I really want to come to contemporary life here now for us. And what I want to suggest is if we could step back and listen to the wisdom that came through Abraham and Moses, that was innovated by Jesus, that came through Muhammad, that was opened up by Krishna and the Vedas, that was opened up by Buddha in a different way, innovated by Confucius and Lao Tzu and the Chinese. I'm just mentioning some. Socrates saying we've got to get out of the cave, know thyself above all, and drinking hemlock in punishment for his radical teaching of awakening life to become a human. They're all saying something very profound, and you begin to see it. They're suggesting the same journey, the evolutionary awakening for humans. They're suggesting that we're living in a kind of cave-like mind. We need to dilate our hearts and our mind and enter into a higher space. And they're all trying to name this space in different ways. Whether you call it Tao, the Tao that is named is not the Tao. Or you go into the Vedic, meditate on Om. Don't talk about it, meditate. Don't predicate, which is what we do. We talk about it in the box, but meditate your way into the Om field, which is the Veda and the yoga. Or Buddha's breakthrough into seeing that humans are suffering because of the dogmatism of their life and their mind. They're not paying attention to the mind operating process. And therefore they suffer, we suffer. And Buddha's medical breakthrough was to see through it and the causes and the science. And his Four Noble Truths are global truths for all humanity. When he urged humanity to rehabilitate, to kick the habit of our mental processing that's holding us in a trapped form of life, which is called samsara in the Indian tradition, for example. So they're all pointing to something deep. You've got to shift, you've got to open up, you've got to dilate your mind, your lens, your script. This is one of the main points I want to make, because we don't often get it, that the conditioned script and language and the patterns and habits of using our language as we do in making ourselves and our world and our culture is coded and could be viral. It could have a word virus. Our language can have a word virus, and we can have a mind virus. And that's what the great teachers were noticing. And so to be a full human, you've got to step out of it and shake it and go to a higher level of an integral form of language and script. But one of the great, amazing, almost comic tragedies of the planet is that despite the wealth of our great teachers calling us to upscript, not download, we keep downloading their teachings into the boxes that we live. And we don't realize we're mutilating and disarming and neutralizing and undermining and undermining. I like the word undermined. They undermined the scripts of our teachers by pulling it down unwittingly. We're all good people, we don't mean to do it, but if we're using a mental processing, think of the computer. If we're using ego word, and it has a kind of virus, and some of our traditions say we're in sin. And I don't want to get into that, but from a philosophical point of view, sin is being cut off from the flow of the unified field. That's really what it means. If you're cut off from the field of reality, you're going to suffer. And if our script, our language that encodes our culture and therefore our lives and our world is viral in the sense that it's cut off, we have a sin script. Script can be a sin script or some samsara. The samsaric cycle of suffering can be encoded in our memes of our culture and our language. So we must wonder, is Jesus speaking a higher tongue? Is he speaking a higher script? Is there a Christ script? When he said weird things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, the logos in the flesh, the weird way to speak. His disciples didn't understand it. They would ask, when did we, unless you die, you cannot be born again, that kind of stuff. And they were speaking the everyday culture. Buddha saw that the cultural language and script and patterns of consciousness that we use are integral to our suffering. So that Buddha's awakening was to let go of that and go into the emptiness, the language of emptiness, shunyata, which is weird. Or when Yahweh calls out to Israel, "Hear, O Israel," and Abraham goes through a huge, deep human struggle for all of us. Do I listen to the infinite voice first, or do I listen to me and my lens and my agenda and what's important to me first? Do I privilege my world and my lens and culture and experience and identity above the higher call? That was a huge moment for humanity. The point I'm trying to make just very briefly is that when you begin to listen and resonate across the planet to a great peak moments in scriptures and philosophy, wisdom, and enlightenment, there is a profound resonance that begins to emerge. They are all noticing that there's a primal field of reality that we're somehow eclipsed and alienated from. And it's infinite. This is the big headline news. There's an infinite force field as a primal resource and ground of all reality. And if you can really process that, it'll be astounding what comes out of that. Whether you call it Tao, or Om, or Brahman, or Shunyata, or Yahweh, or Allah, or any name, nature, spirit, energy, whatever name you use, you're naming the first, and the first is infinite. And if that's true, it's infinitely one. This is huge news. Why? Because if it were two, it would not be infinite. It would be limited by the other. There can be no other to the infinite. And if you follow that logic, and it's infinite, then it has infinite possibilities and names. And what follows from that is that all possible names and forms and scriptures and scripts and perspectives and disciplines and cultures and worlds must come out of it. And that it cannot be fragmented. If it's infinitely unified, it's infinitely connected. And that means if that is a primal source that's surrounding and funding us at every moment, the question then is for all humans, and this is what our great teachers are saying, we've got to be in a deeper, authentic encounter with the primal field to flourish. We come out of that, we co-arise out of it, and if we could develop the technology to tap it and touch it and honor it and recognize it, which was Abraham's struggle, for example, then we can flourish and we can discover who we are, our human form, the self that we are. And if we're cut off from it, whether it's in our evolutionary journey and we've not arrived yet, or whether it's a fall of Adam and Eve out of grace into separation, or the samsaric field, however it happened, it's not that important. The point is, if we're cut off from the fundamental connection, suffering, human, ontological, existential suffering, deep suffering. So when Arjuna on the field of battle in the Bhagavad Gita with a fratricidal war breaks down, and Krishna is his charioteer, the voice of Om, and the dialogue ensues, which is what the Bhagavad Gita is, between the voice of Krishna, the language, the script of Krishna, the Om script, the yoga script, and Arjuna, the everyday warrior, who is in a more ego-based, monocentric, monologue lens, which is always going to polarize and break into war and self-division and self-contradiction and fratricidal war. That comes with the script. And Arjuna has his midlife crisis. He falls. He can't kill his own family. He drops his weapon at the freeze point of the charging of the armies. And Krishna has a breakout moment with him. That's the Bhagavad Gita. And Arjuna says, Krishna, my life is over. I can't, my meaning is gone. I knew what I was to be, what I'm here. I'm a warrior. I'm supposed to enter battle and kill. I can't do that. My dharma is over. My ethics doesn't work because I can't kill in good conscience my own family. And even if I were to be victorious, that would mean nothing to me. I am finished, Krishna. Help me. And he drops his weapon, and the dialogue begins. That's the Bhagavad Gita. And what it's about? It's Krishna smiles. It's a great moment in history because Arjuna is ready to grow up and leave the dysfunctional linguistic mental script, the samsaric script that he's been locked into and doesn't fully understand. And that is the source of his breakdown. So Krishna helps him in the yoga science to cross out of that structure and rehabilitate his mind, chapter after chapter, to learn this technology of meditation, to become one and integral and whole with the unified field, to become an Atman, which is a name for the higher awakened self, which is transpersonal, which is weird. Transpersonal in the sense is trans-ego. If you think the ego is a real self, the ultimate self, and then you discover there's a higher way to be. The ego self is an entity, it's an object. People are not objects. We're persons. We're more than that, and that's what all our great teachers are trying to teach. So how do you cross? What's the rite of passage from the ego-based, monocentric space that seems to be severed and alienated and distant and cut off from the source of life? That's really the basic research. So I'm going to jump on the stage and try to put up some visualizations to show fast forward 3,000 years. The major headline moments in the evolution of script of our global enlightenment. So again, please treat this as a meditation and just journey with me. We're going to go through the portal. Let's just imagine we're stepping out of the whatever lens we have. Try to please say, what is this global lens? Is there a global lens? And what would I see if I do? So in a way, I'm going to go through about 3 or 4 slides, and I'm going to give you, I'm going to do something unusual this time. Usually I go sequentially, and I run out of time. So this time I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to give you the conclusion. And then I will take my time to go through the sequencing. It's huge, So slide 1 is going to be something like this. There is a space across the planet in the evolution of our development of language and thought and scripting in which we humans, individually or collectively, it could be an individual or a tribe, it could be cultic in that sense, it could be a whole, you could have a shared way of vision, and here's a space in which we're using our language is developing, and we're talking about the world, we're giving information, we're predicating. Philosophers call it predicating, to join subjects and predicates to put information together to describe the world. And that's a planetary issue. So I'm here, and we predicate. We join subjects and predicates. Socrates is plus wise. Socrates is not a sophist. We say plus and minus. We join pieces of information to create a thought that makes sense. So this is the place that language, everyday language and literacy works. We predicate. But what we're going to see, we'll talk about that, and what I'll try to show is the geniuses on the planet, the great wisdom, spiritual teachers, and innovators saw that there's a deeper space, whatever you call it, and that if this is where you get stuck, and this is the only language and literacy you know, you'll be cut off from the field, and we'll see how that works. And the whole strategy of spiritual awakening and wisdom is not to get knowledge here, but to move into a different, deeper ground. And there's a different literacy here. Language here is not the same as language here. That's what I'm going to try and show. So when Jesus is speaking from this space and saying weird things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, that doesn't make sense here. Because language, what is the truth? If you say Socrates is wise, that's a sentence. I have a thought. I use a sentence to describe a fact in the world. So language and sentences are formed. If it corresponds to the fact, then it's true. So truth is a correspondence between my thought or my sentence, my proposition, that I'm thinking, and some state of affairs in the world. But what happens is that there can be many different languages of truth in this space. And this is going to complicate it enormously. In other words, if my lens changes, suppose I'm speaking a biblical language and I'm a believer in the biblical world, and I know, and here's one circle representing the biblical truth. In the beginning is infinite spirit. Let there be light, and the cosmos opens up, and everything about my world is spirit rules. And this is one of me, this is I. But I'm also a physicist. And I know that Big Bang is true. And I know that matter rules the universe, not spirit. And it's a very different language, and this me is a different me. This is going to come out in Dr. Sheldrake's beautiful presentation about materialism. Materialism is a language in which matter is the ultimate unifying force to make sense of reality. And your world, it all shows up here. I can go on, so many different alternative narratives and worlds, and they all have their different grammars. But a grammar is important in philosophy. A grammar consists of the laws and patterns whereby you can connect items, words, concepts, terms together to yield sense or meaning. And when you get meaning or sense, you can have the possibility of truth. So meaning or truth describes reality, and you can get to the facts. But how can a person be truth? If you say, I am the truth, that doesn't make sense. You're not a sentence. You're not corresponding to the world. You're a person. You can't be. So it blows out the circuits. when you begin to hear things like that. And yet that's what our great teachers are all saying, a weird language. When you get into the Buddha language of emptiness, you can't use this anymore to understand Buddha's wisdom. So really what I'm going to do is just to develop this and then show that the great teachings are all pointing to we humans have to upscript to a deeper script, an awakened script, an integral script, a holistic script, an I-thou script. That's a way of putting it. Because the I and the other, the thou is a very sacred name, not for an object, but for an other presence that you're not putting your lens on, but standing open in the presence of the other so she can speak, or the work of art can speak, or that nature can speak, the phenomena can speak. And that's where science is going to dilate and open up. Whereas here, whatever you see, your lens, these strokes means that's my lens of my mind. And if I'm using this lens, I have one world. If I'm using this lens, I have another world. If I have this lens, still another. But here's the point. The different structures or grammars or codes that shape one world, when you switch your code or your lens, there's a different structure of meaning. What makes sense in the biblical world may not make sense in the yoga world. It may not make sense in the feng shui world of qi or acupuncture. It's a different sense structure. If your sense shifts, your world shifts. And that's a worldview. So a culture is a worldview encoded in your lens of your mind. And the difficult, challenging thing is that a person can be raised in multiple lenses. You know this. You can be a believing Christian or Jew or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or atheist. And that's one world. Your meaning structure and who you are is in that world. But you could also be a scientist practicing, a biologist, physicist, whatever, speaking that language and living that reality and doing your research there. That's a different world. Or a civic American, keeping your religion out of your politics and opening up ecumenical space for civic democracy. We'll have a dialogue on that in 2 weeks here. Or you could be doing yoga. Many of you are doing yoga and chanting Om. And you're doing it in this way, right? You're doing yoga here. Not all of you. The point I'm making is that yoga, the first axiom of yoga by Patanjali, the great founder of the yoga science, and the sutras are there like the ultimate axioms. Yoga chittas vritti nirodha. Yoga is the quieting of predication. Yoga is the quieting of the ego mind. Yoga is the movement into the space of Om. So what is the script of yoga? That's what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. How to really refine the mind and dilate the script to go into an integral flow where it's not an object. The point I'm making is that this technology of consciousness and language makes it into an object. What's on my screen is an entity, an object. It's objectified. So if I process myself here, which is what we do, because if I ask you, tell me about yourself, you're going to start predicating. Well, I'm an American. I was born in Kansas, and I was on varsity, and married, and, I said, yeah, I want to hear about you. In other words, don't give me your predications. I want to know about you. Who are you? So in other words, we predicate ourselves and each other. And that makes it an it. This is awfully messy. This is huge. When you use this script, even though you don't intend to, you make yourself an object, a being, an entity. That comes from this language. And what the teachers saw is that we're not objects, we're persons. A person is a thou, is more than an object or a package of predication. So all of yoga technology and therapy is to drop that story, step back, you're much more. Step outside. Don't buy that as your ultimate truth. Use it, honor it, but don't get stuck and think that's who you are as a bundle of predication. You're not an object. Love can't happen here. You can't, a lover is not an object. Even if you get a Hallmark card saying, honey, you're the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Don't send a card like that. If she has any wisdom, she'll send it back to you. darling, I'm not an object. I'm a person, right? In other words, this is huge. This is crossing this line is the human space of ethics. All of the great moral teachers understood never treat a person as an object, but as Kant would say, as an end in itself, as a person, as a mensch, as a thou. And that's where the lens issues come in, because if you're always laying your lens on the other and objectifying them, there's a kind of violence in that, unintended. Whereas to stand open in the space, and the crossing into the space is opening the space, whether you call it Om or the Christ space or the Buddha space, whatever term you use. The dialogue space, Martin Buber, his version of it is, there's I, it, ich and du, the name of his great book, ich and I, you. There's I, it, or I, thou. I, thou is a place of dialogos, dialogue. Dialogue doesn't mean two, it means through the logos, in the logos. What is a logos? It's a Greek word for one of the great names, for the fundamental light of reason, the origin of speech and language, of reason itself. So when you hold these truths to be self-evident, you're tapping the logos, rational nature. And we humans allegedly are rational beings. We're logos sapiens, not ego sapiens. And that's what our teachers like Socrates say, know thyself, be thyself. That's the majors for every human as a rational being. Enter the logos, leave the cave, and move into the world of the forms. It was a different way of speaking than you find in other traditions. So this is what I'm trying to really just open up for us visually, that there's a space that's been a messy scene of evolution of our language, and it seems to encode a separation from the ground or the foundation. So if you hear the Buddha speaking and you write it here, you're blowing it. I tried that my first year teaching after I came back from India. I was born in Trinidad, grew up in Jamaica, New York City, studied at Brandeis, got my doctorate, came to Haverford in '68 as a young logician. And then I went to India for the first time. And for the first time, I really listened to the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings of Krishna and the Buddha's teaching, and it blew me away because I only knew predication. A logician was a master of the laws of predication. That's where we make sense. And it's important because what makes sense in one world, as I said, doesn't make sense in another. Try it for a moment, please. How do you know how to put items of information together to make sense rather than nonsense? If we do it, we know that stones don't think. Stones are inert. It's dead matter, allegedly. So if you say, that stone is intelligent, that's called a category mistake for one world. But if you went into a different world, it could be that nature is alive. Consciousness pervades nature. The Lakota, the buffalo is spirit, the mountain is spirit, the stone. You can speak differently, you predicate differently. If you say 7 is blue, that's a crude category mistake, because 7 is an intangible number, not in space and time. Only something in space and time can have color. So if you predicate or join color, blue, with 7, you cross all the grammar, you break your grammar, and you have nonsense. That's the point. So it's very important to know, as a philosopher, what are the laws of predication, the laws of grammar, that allows us to make genuine sense. And if we cross different worlds and there are different ways of making sense of reality, that's going to be very important for culture and for the academy, for liberal arts, and certainly for science. Because what will be a fact in one world will not be a fact in another. If you use a Newton lens, you'll get a Newton world. If you morph your lens to an Einstein lens, you'll get new possibilities of light bending in the gravitational field. And new phenomena become apparent. If you move from allopathic medicine, Western scientific medicine, into acupuncture, and you begin to understand the meridians of the anatomy in a totally different way, that's a different world, a different reality that you get from switching your lens in that way. So I hope you're getting the sense of what I'm getting at. I'm leading up to the headline that our great traditions, if you open the global lens, step back a moment into this space, into the global lens, and if you can just listen and resonate with the struggle of Abraham, Or Moses bringing the laws and his encounter at the burning bush when he's in the presence of the divine and asking, what is your name? Whom shall I say sent me? And the reply from Yahweh, I am that I am. A different kind of language. Scripture cannot be downloaded here. It's a different level of scripture. And so when you go into Jesus' version, when he's trying to upscript and speak this language, and saying what he said about I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the Last Supper, when he says, take this wine, and this is my blood. This is bread, but this is my body. Those kinds of rituals are shifting the reality from this script to the Christ script. And the rite of passage is the sacrament of crossing over. And what's going on? East and west, north and south. It's that you can't avoid or get away from the recognition that on the ground floor of reality, for consciousness gravitates to the source of the light that funds us with life in every way, and language and script. Everything comes from the field. And if the field is infinite, then we're infinitely connected with that. And if we're cut off from it by our own unwilling or unwitting patterns of consciousness, and that's what our teachers were reminding us of, then we're in deep trouble. So the essence of global enlightenment across the planet is that we need to upscript into the deeper, integral, I-thou, dialogue, holistic script. The I-thou script is not like the I-it script. So that when a student, for example, when I'm teaching this and student athletes, I know they're in the zone, and they're on the soccer field, and somehow they weren't ego soccer. It was a magic moment when the team clicked, and there was resonance, and they were together as one, and they were unstoppable. And the right wing chips the ball in, and the center forward is up in the air. It was beautiful ballet. They were connected. How? They were in the zone. What's the language of the zone? We don't know. Come back to the locker room, and you go right back into where you were before, right? So that when musicians jazzing reached that magic of jazzing together, we were one. It was one music. We were the music. Or a runner who's running nature trail after years, and suddenly one day she comes back, and I use double parentheses to mark that. She is the running. It's not I am running, but running am I. It's that I am the running. In other words, that's the key to I-thou script. It's holistic and integral, and your utterance is who you are. You can't sever it anymore. That's one of the great insights of headline news. This script, by its nature, is separating and dividing and polarizing. The language itself represents something outside of itself. So when you say snow is white, it pictures facts out there. And I'm here in consciousness. So consciousness is separated from language, is separated from the world. And there are divisions and lines. And you see how messy this is. What we don't know, the really missing headline news, and this is almost sensational when you listen to our great teachers. I'm going to flip this chart and give you a break. I know. So what I was giving you a map of where I was going. I said, first you start here. This is getting dry here. I hope you can see it. Right? That was like where culture we started, the story. Then we kept saying there was a line here. What I do is I use double parentheses to mark the difference and single markers. So whenever you're in this technology, any word, mark it that way. Single strokes. Logicians do that to help the mind see it. It's so important because before this separation opened up, that was my whole life work. As I studied these thinkers, I said, wait a minute, they're speaking a different script. It's a different level of language. We need to mark it. And I was trying to help my students. So Krishna is speaking a different space than Arjuna. Buddha is speaking a different place from the listeners. Jesus is speaking a different script from his disciples and trying to teach them. But if they're conflated, imagine this. What if this is all in the same box? This is what we do. If all you have is the ego-based script, the monologue, and that's the only way you can translate it, then everything you hear is going to be there. So I use double parentheses to mark the higher awakened script. that's vital for our survival, the infinite space where everything is interconnected, the thou space from the I-it space. But if you download it into your box, imagine if this is the situation. I'm going to really enlarge that. This is our culture. This is our literacy. Anything I hear, I'm going to interpret it here. So here, Buddha speaks, and here's Buddha's truth. Here's truth, the Noble Truth 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll give you the 4 Noble Truths. If you'd like to know about yoga, well, here's what Krishna says. Krishna is teaching Dharma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. There it is. And you'd like to hear about Jesus? Well, Jesus said, I'm the way, and you get it all, and you're putting it here. So here's the fact of what we've been doing habitually for centuries. We download the higher script within the walls of the ego-mental monocentric script. And so we put God in the box and speak of God without realizing that by predicating God, you've taken the infinite and download it into the finite space and proceed with your worship. And that's why Nietzsche said God is dead, and the Christians have killed him. It's an awesome thing, an outrageous thing to say. How can we know God is not dead? But if you name God in the ego box, you've taken the infinite word, because God is the infinite word. Tao is the infinite word. Om is the infinite word. Shunyata is infinite. The infinite word cannot be finitized in the ego mental space. It's a profound form of violence to the infinite. You can't downscript scripture. You've got to upscript to meet scripture. That's what our great teachers were saying. So I say comic tragedy of human situation is, despite the pleadings of our great teachers to upscript, please leave the cave, step into the higher space, step into dialogue, step into connectivity, step into love, step into compassion, step into truth. It's all in the integral space. We download the information, and this is where I think, in terms of Dr. Sheldrake, in terms of the materialism, it's not only materialism in the sense of one particular worldview. Materialism is a worldview, the specific ideology in the box that takes matter to be the ultimate unifying force of all our language and that's the meme. We could say spirit rules, but that's idealism. Idealism is the ego-based story that says spirit is ultimate and it rules. The world is spiritual. But in a way, that's a materialism. What I'm suggesting is that when you put something in the box, you've reduced it. You've downgraded it. Reality is here. The field of reality, the consensus of wisdom, is the field of reality is a profound field of interconnectivity. Physics is beginning to touch that. The non-local, interconnected butterfly effect of the possibility of understanding the script of a black hole and dark matter. You have to push the grammar to a deeper place to get into that conceptuality in the first place. So the main difficulty for the human condition is that when are we going to really get it that we can't download the higher teachings and script into what's familiar to us, which is understandable. It's a language of literacy we know, and we're hyper-literate in that respect. But we don't realize that when you do it, there may be a word virus. That if you take the word Om and downgrade it into your space, that you may have mutilated it or affected it, rather than the other way to step into the Om space or the Tao space and so forth. So the question of script is all important. So this picture is like the classical, typical picture of what's been going across the planet. And this is not just a Western thing, this is East and West. That's why Buddha was addressing that situation. That's why the yoga philosophy was addressing how do you break the egocentric barrier? Because the space that we have is a space that this is our script. This is our language. And so we're going to put everything we hear and translate it into our language without knowing the consequences. So we make it an it. And what I'm really trying to bring out is that it's a huge issue because ethics is a place in which we step into the sacred space of self and other in an open, honorable, mutually respectful dialogic encounter. If you objectify one another, you're slashing one another with your lens, not intending to do harm, but we do that. That's why in so many forms of breakdown in culture, this is another piece of headline that I have not yet developed before. But the law of this everyday cultural space is a law of identity. The law of identity is very powerful. A is A. Logicians know that, East and West. That's the law that rules meaning here. When I say I am I. And that means everything else is not I. So the law of identity, A is A, means that A is A, and therefore any item that has meaning, one word, one meaning, one identity, one name tag, that's the way we put our technology of language together, practicing the law of identity. And when you have identity, it differentiates and splits by calling me A, I've displaced what's not A. And then everything is either A or not A. Things cannot be both A and not A. The laws begin to come out of the law of identity, A is A, the either or law. So something very simple like saying A, I am A, I got my space, it's me. And taking that in an atomic, separate identity. And that's how our language is built. And then we start to predicate and put them together and say S is P, where P has its identity and S has its identity, and we're alleging that they're joined. But how do you join two atoms of units that are separate? It's artificial. And yet, if that's what we're doing for our life, we're doing artificial synthetic predications with atomic units that don't cohere. And what's the result of that? It's a devastation to human flourishing. Why? Because your own inner life begins to be fragmented across multiple identities. Your mind and your body is not connected well, the mind-body problem. I and you, they're splits. My Christian grammar is alienated from your Muslim grammar. And even though we're children of Abraham, there's a lot of violence between the Judaic, Christian, and Muslim worlds and identities. Holocaust, genocide, ethnic cleansing, divorces, breakdown, failure of communication, clashes of worlds, 9/11s. What's up? Our genius is new. It traces back to living the life of identity in the box. It cuts our worlds off from one another, and there's no dialogue because each has their own identity. And so there's no dialogue. So how do we bring the worlds together and bring peace? How do we have a democracy? We're going to talk about this in 2 weeks when we meet here for an open dialogue. Democracy means we the people hold the power in self-governance. But if we the people are each living in our own space and in our own cultures and our own subcultures and our own interest groups and so forth, and that's our language, we're going to duke it out and have power plays in the civic space. That's not we the people. So the call is, can we go into the dialogos? Can we go into the dialogue? What would a life and culture of dialogue be? Where we stand open to one another and respect diversity. There's profound diversity in this place, in the fundamental field. So in our motto, in American case, E pluribus unum is our motto. E pluribus unum. Out of the many, one. One nation. Indivisible. Not fragmented and broken and divided. So the culture and civic space that lives a life of identity, that fragments and alienates and breaks down. And we can't have human relations, we can't have love, we can't have ethics, we can't have reason. So it's huge. So I just want to open this theme up and suggest now as I pass this over to our featured keynote, Dr. Sheldrake, on his amazing book. Just think about it, please, just to anticipate and build a bridge. I've been suggesting that if you're in the box, it's not just if you believe in matter that matter rules, and that sense of materialism, which does dominate our cultural story. That's what Dr. Sheldrake seems to me to bring out so beautifully. But any story you have is going to be an ideology. The word ideology is a set, your grammar, your worldview, your story, your eidos, your ideas that shape your culture. Everyone in the ego-mental space or the monocentric space with your lens is living an ideology. But if you objectify it here, whether it's spiritualism, you could believe in spiritualism, you could believe in Buddhism. And Buddha first said that it's not an ism. Buddha's teaching was to get out of the box of ideology. The Quaker teaching was to get out of the box of ideology, not to let any story or any identity script dominate your conscience. How do you not let ideologies or a grammar or a story or a set of identities rule your life? Well, that's really what global wisdom and enlightenment is alleging to teach. So I invite us to think, please, as we listen now to Science Set Free. If entering this space, and by the way, when Descartes tried to perform this great experiment for Europe, we missed it. If you know anything about Descartes' meditations, he saw that he could doubt everything that was presented in his belief system. New slide, please. What is a belief system? It's your network of predications. A belief, if I say snow is white and I believe it, I embrace it as true. I believe it. Beliefs are judgments that we make of what is true. And so they're predications. All of your belief systems, whatever they may be, they could be about matter rules, it could be spirit rules, it could be dualism rules, you could have all kinds of different worldviews, but those are your ideologies. Is it possible to live as a human being beyond ideology? Well, that's what our great teachers were speaking. It says, step into the place where you mature as a person. So when Descartes was saying, I could doubt all of this, he was a genius, he was a mathematical genius. He innovated analytic geometry. And then he stood back and says, do I really have any certainty in my life? And he saw he could question, I might be dreaming. Right now I could be dreaming. So waking and dreaming, that's not good. Even 2 + 2 = 4, he says, thank God, even in my dream that's true. But then he saw, wait a minute, what if there's a demon deceiving me and tricking my mind to make it look as if it's true so I could believe it? That's when I get tricked. So I could be wrong about 2 + 2 = 4. In other words, when you're believing in this technology, you're believing an item separate from yourself. And you can have an intervention of a distortion and a deception. And as Freud would say, what if you're the deceiver of yourself in self-deception? What if there's within you a shadow voice that's deceiving you? It just hasn't to be an external deceiver. Then now everything is up for grabs. Everything is subject to doubt. That's what the great teachers saw, that if you're living a life of predication, it's ungrounded. But if you could step into the deeper ground, and now what I'm doing, which I have not done before, this is very radical, that's a double bracket. I'm suggesting that if you follow the logic that on the ground floor of reality is an infinite field, this is going to get scary. Because if there's an infinite force that is sourcing every breath I take, and I couldn't live without it, I couldn't ego without it, my possibility to ego is dependent upon funding from that source. Why? Because a source is where relations flow and connect. In the identity box, everything is an atomic separate item that's disconnected. If you're living a disconnected life, your life is going to show it. If you're living in the zone, you're going to be in peak performance, is what our great teachers are saying. You've got to get into the script that flows, and connections are held up. So what Descartes did when he reached this point, he says, oh my God. And he said, I am. That's the great I am. But we missed it. He saw that, he says, this could all be wrong. And then he said, my God, he was very distraught. He was in despair. And then he said, well, wait a minute, I am. He didn't realize for Europe that he tapped the meditative space in his meditations. on first philosophy. That's the title of his book, Meditations on First Philosophy, which is getting to what is first. So when Descartes said, I am, he said he defeated the demon. And I'd like you to think about that. That's your homework. Why, when Descartes said, I am, in this deep voice, was the demon of doubt and deception and ignorance defeated? Because, I'll give you a hint, because he was his very utterance. Meditative speech, when you say I am, you're not describing some fact outside beyond you. When you say I am, you are amming. You are your very utterance. When God said, I am that I am, he's saying to Moses, I am. And he's not speaking predication language with a pronoun that's referring to a noun or to some external thing. It's a non-dual holistic language. Integral language. And when I hear the beautiful work of Dr. Sheldrake about resonance and resonant fields, and that if you understand an open resonance and morphic fields, and to understand that surrounds us, what would happen to science then? So I'll leave you with this thought. We miss Descartes because we pull him right back into the box and beat him up, rather than saying, wow, he opened the door into the deeper space of an uncharted language that we need to get to save our culture and upgrade ourselves to be in the ground, to be in the field. So that this is the point. We can do science here. We could have belief systems. We could move from Newton to Einstein and Hawking's and others. Or we could go into the space where our great teachers are saying, this is where you open the lens to really encounter what's on the ground floor as it is. So if this is the work of the Van Gogh, and I'm open to it, and I'm not putting my lens on it, but I stand open between the work of art and let it speak, that's aesthetic experience. Aesthetic, that you could see the beauty. If you could open up to nature and let nature speak, see the sunset, listen to it, with all you've got, step out of your lens. Now you're in deep observation. Could we be scientists in this space of deep dialogue with the phenomena? Because so much of the phenomena of our lives are paranormal. If you have a psychic experience, and this is where Dr. Sheldrake beautifully opened up, for the science here, it becomes not feasible. It's paranormal. So it's illusory. So reject it. But if you listen to this, then being a self, being a human is paranormal. Love is paranormal. Language is paranormal. Christ is paranormal. Atman is paranormal. It's all out of the box because this is normal. And when you put your lens and your technology of normalcy on reality, it deforms it and it becomes extra normal, right? So that if you could dare to open up the field of connectivity, where everything is connected, and that was a basic axiom across the planet. If the ground floor is infinite, everything is interconnected. So the fabric of reality is the web of interconnectivity. It's fractal. Every point in the field, when I put the double brackets, any point you take here and you raise here, it becomes fractal in the sense of it's interconnected with the entire field. I'm leaving you with that thought. Every grain of sand encodes the infinite within it. That's the script. So that's why Blake, the poet, could say there's infinity in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour. Because time here is not the same as time that's broken in identity. Past is over, future is not yet, present is fleeting. Ego-based monocentric time is chopped up. Integral time flows. And if you could be in this now, which is what the great geniuses are calling us to, be here now. Enter the space, enter the zone, live in the zone. That's our birthright, and that's where we become fully human. So think of science and culture and life and love and democracy in the space of deep dialogue. Thank you so much for your patience.